Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I'm Colin McFader, and with me, as always, is Clark Coffey. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, man. How are you?
I'm good.
I
Should we do our weather update, our classic?
Well, I was going to say we could do the weather update. It is a beautiful fall day here.
Same here.
But I was just going to say, we had Thanksgiving here in the United States last week, and I've been living off of pumpkin pie basically. So I'm super amped for this episode. I'm
Excellent.
running on
That's the
pumpkin
perfect-
pie. I mean, it's like
the perfect fuel.
perfect fuel for film.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, yeah, everything is great, man. Yeah.
Excellent. So today we're talking about lesson 16, which is music.
Yes.
Which is a very interesting topic with Herzog because he loves all that choral stuff, but he also uses some pretty interesting music choices in a lot of his movies.
Very
that are kind of, unusual in a way, but also work really well.
Well, certainly at least to, my American ears, and I would imagine to quite a few like Western listeners, he uses an extraordinary range of music, which often really helps kind of lend his films kind of I don't know if surrealness is the right word, but I think kind of like awe. I kind of get a sense from a lot of his music choices, which is kind of what he's trying to do with the visuals of his films, right? Is just like this presenting these unknown and unique landscapes. And
it's like bringing you into a dream-like state almost. That's what I always get the impression
absolutely. I mean, so it'll be exciting. Yeah, I think that, unlike somebody, and I don't get me wrong, I love Scorsese, but it's definitely a different conversation to have about music than if you were talking about a director like him, because we could just talk about the Rolling Stones, if we were going to talk about. I mean, I kind of joke. Obviously, Scorsese uses a lot of music that's not the Rolling Stones, but it's kind of funny that I don't think
it always comes up.
It always comes up, and Herzog is somebody that uses such an interesting breadth and range of music.
And it's almost, I find, not to dwell on the difference for too long, but I always find that the interesting part of it, the difference is that I find that Scorsese, his attraction to that type of music comes from the fact that it's almost like his childhood or what he like the nostalgia of it. Whereas Herzog, I find that he almost, and I can't confirm this because he's never really said this, but I feel like he almost uses music that he's hearing for the first time during the production.
So it's really interesting that you mention that. It's interesting that you mention it. I don't know for sure. It's one of those things where I've read so many interviews or watched so many interviews of Herzog, and I've listened to him kind of speak about his child so many times that I can't place this specifically, and people out there, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I am 99% sure that Herzog claims, at least, that he actually did not hear recorded music until he was about 18.
Huh.
So, yeah. And so
I've never heard that, but that's interesting if it's true. Yeah.
And so, if it's true, and it's part of the mythology. Like I said, I'm almost positive Herzog has said this, about himself. I would assume it's true if he said it. I don't know why you would make that up, but that is a huge difference, right? Because you're exactly right. You point out something really interesting in that, if you hadn't heard music, Herzog also had not seen film until he was kind of formed in a sense, basically like at the end of adolescence. Then you wouldn't have that, right? The whole this nostalgia that, let's say, somebody like Scorsese has, where he's bringing in music he grew up with. Well, if you don't grow up with music, I would imagine that gives you an entirely unique perspective on how you see music just in general, right? So it's it's really interesting that you bring that up. But yeah, I'll have to go back and look. But I'm almost positive that that's kind of part of the mythology of Herzog. Somehow he grew up without even listening to pre-recorded music until he was 18. But growing up in the Bavarian mountains or wherever,
there were no turntables or record players.
Right.
I know we've talked about this before individually, and you've mentioned that when you write, sometimes you'll write with music, and I think we both do, but I think we do in very different ways.
Okay.
So I'm curious to know what how is music involved in your process, in your creative process?
Sure. So, and this is not always, right? This is sometimes. But often I will, and this music comes in a handful of ways. So sometimes, let's say I'll sit down and I know the scene that I'm trying to write, or let's say I'm editing it, right? I need to revisit a scene and rewrite a scene. And so I already have like this conceptualization of what the scene's going to be. I will sometimes listen to music that I feel really represents the energy or tone of this scene.
Right.
And so often too, for me, it's like there may be even like one specific song or a couple songs, and it can get kind of I have to do this with headphones on because it can drive anybody around me nuts. But I might listen to a song on loop, for the entire duration of my writing of this scene, if I feel like that song really encapsulates and represents the tone or energy that I'm going for, or puts me in the emotional state that I feel like represents the scene, if that makes sense. Other times, if I'm kind of writing a first draft and I don't know where things are going to go necessarily, I might listen to music, maybe an artist or an album, or kind of pick a playlist that I feel like, puts me in the space, the overall kind of space of whatever story that I am writing.
Right.
And I kind of might refine that as I go, right? The story might take me in different places, and I find that the music I'm currently listening to is not a good representation of that, and so I'll stop and find something else, or but then sometimes
I'm curious to know though,
Yeah.
does that song, like let's say you find a song that really well encapsulates
Right.
the mood of your scene, does that then carry on through your production? Like, do you use that when you are shot listing, and then do you use that when you're, even getting you psyched up for the shoot, and then do you use that when you're editing, and then if you're using a composer, do you share that
Right.
song with the composer, or is it something that just kind of starts and ends in editing or in writing?
In
Sorry.
writing, yeah. So that's a really good question. I think in my experience, it's run the gamut. Now of it sometimes those things kind of stop with writing because whatever I've written ends up changing so much, whether it's through rewrites or I've never actually shot with music. And it's something that I certainly could explore, but I tend to not kind of give that piece to the other. So let's say, I've written a scene where there's a couple actors, they're having some kind of like moment or dialogue here. I've written the scene to a particular piece of music. I've never said, "Hey, actors, here's some music that I wrote to this with too.
Right. Yeah.
Take this as part of your homework." I've actually never done anything like that. I've definitely never had any songs carry all the way through the process to the point of that actual song is in the finished product, because I've just never been in a position to be able to afford, most of the music that I listen to actually put it in my films. But I definitely have, for people I've collaborated with who've written and recorded music, I've definitely said, "Hey, here are some examples of," but I don't think I've ever given just one piece of music though and said, "Hey, this is what I listened to whenever I wrote this. I want you to create something that's similar to tone." I'm afraid if I give like one piece of music that there might be a temptation to just kind of try to recreate that one piece. So
That's a very specific
and
point.
so, and so that's what I've always, for my process, if I give music, but sometimes it's not music necessarily that I might give. It, I have given, like pictures of paintings or clips from other films, or it's not always just music as an inspiration that I have given to composers, because I'm not a musician myself, so let's get that right get that right out there in the open, and I don't want to hand over to someone who is a musician, who is a composer, my limitations, right? So I want them. I'm saying, "Hey, please, like, take a look at the scene, or here's the script." Like, I want to bring them into the story, and I really want to maximize their ability to collaborate and bring their expertise and talent to the film. So I'm really, I am very cautious. I understand my limitations I'm pretty narrow. So I don't want to bring that to other people who are actually quite broad, in their skills and knowledge and experience of music. So I don't know if that answered your question exactly.
No, yeah, that did. I was correct in my assumption that we do both start out the same, but then get very different.
Yeah.
because for me, music is very, I would say 90% to 95% of the time that I write something or that I create something,
Yeah.
music is the beginning of it.
Okay. Oh,
And
wow.
that, so for example, the Western that I did, I guess it's 2 years ago now, or was it last? I can't remember. But in the last few years,
Right.
that started because there's a piece that's unused in The Thing that Ennio Morricone wrote.
Ah.
I think it's called Eternity, I think the track name is, and it was unused, but it's in the soundtrack.
Okay.
And I remember listening to it and just visualizing this idea of this, it sounds sort of like a funeral march, and it's this descending organ, and it's great. It's very synthy as well. And I thought this doesn't sound anything like a Western soundtrack, but I was just picturing this like cowboy trying to return money that he stole to his family and all this stuff, and that
Mm.
became the movie. And so when I do that though, and this is for, I can probably say, for pretty much every movie I've ever written, I will write and I will collect all the music that I wrote, and I'll make almost like a proto soundtrack
Okay.
that I will then visualize scenes to and do the shot listing to, and then I will share that with the cast and crew,
Yeah.
sort of say. And then when I get to the point where I am like, I don't really play the music while we're on set, of course, but
Right.
everyone is aware of that. Then at the point where I get a composer involved, it's usually a conversation of, there's sometimes when I will specifically say I really like the sound of this,
Mhm.
so for that instance, it was this descending organ that just kind of made it right from the outset of the movie seem like that this character is not going to make it out alive.
Mm.
So the
Mhm.
movie is more about how that happens rather than like what happens at the end kind of
Right.
thing. So I sometimes will say, I really like the sound of descending organ, so if we can do something with that, it's really cool. But
Yeah.
I've also had experiences too where it's not been the style of music, it's been the feeling of the music that has really gotten me. So I've sort of said, take a look at the cut with it temp scored with this, and then here's a cut completely with no music. And if you like the sound of the temp, feel free to kind of emulate that. Obviously,
Mhm.
to a certain extent, imitation you can get away with it, but
Right.
sometimes you can't.
Right.
But also, I've always been very clear that it's like, if you have a completely different idea, this being the composer, if you have a completely different idea or something that you want to run by me that has nothing to do with what the temp sounded like, I'm very happy to hear it. And I always just sort of consider it sort of like showing, paintings or old photographs to a DP. Like
Right.
that's kind of in my mind the same thing, where it's like this, because of the fact that this track is so intertwined with the way that the story is going and the way that the
Mhm.
story was written.
Yeah.
I find that it's really, to me, it really helps my process if I keep that track kind of going with it. And then, I mean, I'm lucky because the first few times I did this, I was concerned that if I got attempts or a score back from a composer that was completely different, that I'd be like, oh, no, it's ruined. But more often than not, I am completely happy when it's changed up and it's different. Because it
Okay.
provides a whole new life to it. And
So
so,
you find that you aren't so attached, like having
no.
taken that
Yeah,
piece
it's
of
by no
music through
means
the
it's
whole
an
process.
attachment.
Yeah.
It's more of like I take it more as like a guide, that then, you can kind of take the training wheels off at the end and kind
Yeah.
of then play around with it. And I have, I'm also, like you, I'm not a musician, I would say. I don't have much theoretical knowledge of music, but I have played piano and I know basic terminology and the ways
Right.
to communicate certain things that I want. So I'm very involved in the music process in the way of like, if I want more brass or if I want it to be faster or
Mhm.
something like that, I can communicate those ideas. And
Sure.
it's very collaborative. Whereas I know a lot of directors just kind of hand it off and they're happy to let and that might be more where you lie, is that you kind of are happy to let a composer who's an expert on music run out that course more independently than say, I'd love to be there with the composer sitting there in the recording sessions and being able to listen to that.
Right.
Um,
I mean that I certainly would take the opportunity to do that, and it's not that I don't. I think it's more just a tight, in the same way that I don't give feedback to an actor saying, loud. I try not to speak to. Here's what I want the output of your
mhm.
interpretation to be. What I try to do is feed the input, right?
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they're still working independently as an interpretive artist to take the inputs and I'm their process brings the output, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I kind of, it's, if that makes any sense, right? So I'm
Yeah,
never
no,
saying
totally.
like louder, faster, softer, happier, sadder, like, which are of course ridiculous,
Yeah,
feedbacks to
yeah,
give to an actor. But I
yeah.
mean, but it happens all the time. But it's more about, I ask questions and try to lead through, asking questions about given circumstances and etc. So it's kind of the same. My that how I would work with a composer is kind of in the same way where, I'm trying to, I'm absolutely working hard in a collaborative way to share my vision
Mm-hmm.
of what of the tone, of the tone and sometimes plot, although that's not as vital, but really about the feeling. What am I trying to kind of share from a deeper kind of place of feeling and tone and color and texture in the scene, not literally color, but emotionally color and tone and texture, and making sure that the whoever's doing the music, writing the music, is on the same page as that.
Mm-hmm.
That, as opposed to like more brass, or I mean, sometimes sure it's like I really feel like something that's cello driven here would work, but I'm always like open, you know. Um,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
totally. That's I think the key. And I also, I mean,
yeah,
this is also, I would say, more rare, but I like more rare in the industry, that I'm always happy to re-edit to the composer.
yeah. No, oh,
I'll,
absolutely.
yeah,
Now,
like I
now
will
that's
always say to a composer, if you have a moment that, and on
yes,
this Hitchcock thing that I'm doing right now, I did this exact thing where it was the composer said, I think I could use like another beat to hang on to that moment right there and do something fun with
absolutely
it. And so I'll re-edit. I know that that's more difficult to do in the industry because usually it's picture locked at the point where it goes to the composer so that the
right.
VFX and all that can be started.
Absolutely,
But
yeah,
but I know, I mean, I know Spielberg did that for E.T. And I think has done that several times with John Williams, where
yeah.
he's been happy to re-edit pieces for or moments for the
For
music to
pieces
fit
that
better.
William,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and that's a really good thing that you bring up. We've talked about writing, we've talked about other aspects of bringing music into the process, but we've not really talked about editing so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I really feel like for me, I've got a strong sense of rhythm in my writing, and not just with dialogue, but I have a very strong connection to a rhythm of words when I'm writing. I
Mm-hmm.
also feel that connection very strongly in the edit. And it's interesting because more often than not, it is some kind of internal rhythm. I don't usually, very rarely, edit to an external piece of music or
Mm-hmm.
rhythm, or but the cut, I mean, rhythm is so vital. And again, I'm not a master editor. I have definitely edited a lot of things because just the nature of independent filmmaking, this is what
Yeah,
you do.
you will fall into it. Yeah.
And so, but I would never say I am an editor.
Mm-hmm. Me
Um,
neither. Me neither.
but
By no means. Yeah.
but just it kind of my intuitive process, I mean, is there's very much a rhythm there. And you really brought up a great point. It just depends on, like, how you're able to work with people, right? I mean, especially at certain stages of your career, well, you don't have access to just any and every potential work. The way you've got to work with people sometimes just kind of necessitates, like, okay,
Yeah.
well, this is what it is. So I have definitely recut things to other pieces of music. And of course, I've also had, I've worked with composers to say, hey, actually, like, I feel like this cut has its own really perfect internal rhythm. Let's actually create the music to this very specific thing. So I've done both things, and hey, it's like, I think if you can do it, you know,
And I think it's interesting because there's a, I think it's the Hollywood Reporter roundtable with a few composers, and I think it's like Danny Elfman
oh
and
yeah, I love
Alexandre
those.
Desplat and a few other people.
Okay, is this more of a
But
recent one? I haven't seen these
no,
in a
I
while.
think it came out a few years ago. But
Okay,
it's interesting is there's a point where Danny Elfman talks about, or it might be Danny Elfman or someone else who talks about the fact that when it's like cut to a temp score, that so often the rhythm of the scene
mm-hmm.
is dictated by the music. And so I
Right.
think that's kind of where the amendment comes in, where I say, I've cut this to, if I do, I don't always, but in the event that I'm so, into this scene, having the rhythm of a certain piece, and I cut to that,
Mm-hmm.
then I will always, again, say that, like, take it without the temp score once too, take a look at it, or even watch it before you've heard the temp score, the one
Mm-hmm.
without, and figure out where you need time, where I can re-edit because I'm happy to re-edit. And there's another point too where they talk about oh yes, the idea that, and this kind of brings us up to the next point in Herzog's comment, which is that there's a really wide kind of philosophy in music and film these days that the music shouldn't be noticed, and it's really weird to me.
Oh wow.
And
You think
Elfman,
so? Really?
and well, Elfman even mentions in the Hollywood Reporter interview
Right?
roundtable, he says, that it's an interesting kind of evolution of movie
Hmm.
music, that it shouldn't be noticed, or that it should be underplayed just to just to complement the scene, but shouldn't
Right.
draw attention to
It
itself. And
shouldn't
then
overwhelm. It shouldn't. Yeah.
he mentions, growing up with Hitchcock movies, it's like you
Hmm.
feel and you hear every note from Herman,
Right.
and that music is not in the background at all. That music
Well,
is right up
neither is
front, and that
Williams. You
oh yeah,
mentioned Williams
yeah,
with Spielberg. Yeah, I mean that's about as much in
and
the face as you could get. Yeah.
that's what I really like. I
Okay.
actually prefer that style of music, and I think that Herzog very interestingly does that a lot too. Like his especially when he uses those big choral pieces.
You're right.
It's very, very upfront. Even that moment in Encounters at the End of the World with the penguin walking away, and it's this like
Yes.
Gregorian chant,
Yes.
and it's this beautiful piece of music. And it would be, it would be funny if anybody else were doing this, but because it's Herzog, it's like existential dread.
I,
Um,
I absolutely, and I completely agree with you. I mean, and I don't. It's interesting that the language that you're using, that or that you're talking about, that they were using in this Hollywood Reporter roundtable, is kind of interesting to me. That music should be in the background or something. It's kind of such a weird way to think about it.
mhm.
But but talking about Herzog and his usage of music, I mean, Herzog talks about how important it is to find the mood, and so much of what we've been talking about now is, our processes for music and how it affects the mood of a film, etc. How it emphasizes the emotional qualities that we're trying to communicate in our stories. Of course, I mean that's it's. I feel like the music is such a vital. We talked about sound right last week, and how sound is at least 50% of a film, and we kind of both agreed that it's maybe even more. Music is so vital. I feel like we talked about how sound is kind of a more direct link to your brain, right? It's like your visual processing is kind of more of a analytical or conceptual kind of process. I
Literal,
feel like
yeah,
in some sense, but sound has such an immediate and
yes,
visceral connection to
yeah.
emotion,
It's
and
almost, it's
so
more, I would say, more
it's more
instinctual.
visceral. It's
Yeah,
instinctual. It's primal, right?
yeah,
It's kind of this
yeah.
primordial kind of thing, and right. And so it's, the way we process and are affected by sound and vision, I think, are quite different. Same with smell, right?
Hmm.
Smells can bring
Yeah.
back memories in ways that are, so extraordinary compared to a vision or
Yeah, no,
sounds. So
smell
our
can
senses.
the amount of times that I've smelled something and been like, that's my, my late grandmother's house from when I was 4 years
Yeah.
old, and it's like weird. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so, Herzog has yet to use smell-o-vision for any of his
Yeah.
films. So we'll have to wait for
Unfortunately, I think
that,
that's making a comeback though. I've invested in it. So
You're invested in it, right? It's like Dolby smell-o-vision.
yeah,
But
yeah.
but yeah, so there's kind of, it's just that our brains process these things, the sensory input in different ways, and so I feel like music is it's powerful in slightly different ways. And I feel like Herzog, if you were to remove the music of so much, I think of like the opening scene of Aguirre, the encounters, the scene that you just mentioned, and countless
Hmm.
others, frankly, countless others that I feel like there's at least a moment or two in every one of his films.
Nosferatu has a ton of it, like some great, great
Right.
musical moments.
White Diamond, Encounters, we just mentioned that. So many of these films.
Into dark, what the dark lessons in darkness.
Lessons of Darkness. Yeah, I mean, we could literally mention
I
probably
mean, I
every
think
one of his films where the music is so integral to
yes,
creating that overall emotional landscape or
and I think
soundscape.
that's the key to it as well, is that there's again, there's no right or wrong answer, both because
Sure.
everyone has their own taste, but also because
Right.
I think that all of these things can be used at different times. There are certainly moments when I did a long form short. It was about half an hour back in 2017, 2018,
Hmm.
and there was a moment where the character wakes up and there's like a big realization, and it's about midway through, And I just kept thinking of these like this like loud brass hit when it happened. Like that's really what I wanted. So I played with it myself just on some software that I have, and then I talked to the composer and I sort of described the feeling that I get from it. And then also, again, to leave the open interpretation there, saying that obviously it doesn't have to be a brass hit. That was just kind of my interpretation of it, but it could be whatever brings that emotion. But it's a very big moment that is in combination with the music. And I think that a lot of people, and I know directors that are like this, that think that for some reason music is a separate element, that they will complain if they feel like the music is telling you what to feel on the nose, or is too clearly interpreting
too literal.
image.
Yeah.
And but I've never had an issue with that. Like I've always thought if a scene is sad and there's sad, of course there's a degree to which it can get kind of absurd. But I mean, if someone's shocked and you use music to accent that in a a subjectively good way, then I don't really have a problem with that. Whereas I know a lot of directors who are very much like, no, I don't want the music there at all, because then I'm relying on it. Well, and I've never really seen an issue with relying on music, because it's a part of the movie. It's
interesting.
It's as integral as the sound design or as anything else, right?
Sure. I mean, I think this is interesting. You've mentioned something that is a really compelling thing to kind of think about. I think, I am one of those people that I don't like on the nose emotional manipulation. Of course, I want to be moved by a film, and so it's not that I expect that a film shouldn't move me. Of course not. I hope that a film will move me, but I don't want to be pulled by the nose, to that movement.
It's that conclusion.
I don't want to be told what to think or told what to feel and told the exact moments that I should be feeling these things. And I'd like to be able to find my own way emotionally through a story and kind of apply my own interpretations. So I think, it really depends on what the rest of the film is doing, right? I think if the film is very on the nose, it's very predictable. It's like, it's not leaving you as an audience any room for your own interpretation. Yes, or right. And then you also then add music on top of all, the script does this, the performances, if the script is very narrow and on the nose, if the performances are very narrow and on the nose, if the, everything visually is on the nose, and then the music is also on the nose, I mean, it's overwhelming, right? And that can be too much. But so I'm definitely not a fan of that kind of filmmaking.
Oh yeah, totally. And that's what I mean when I say it works to a degree.
You're right, right.
That I like,
but sometimes, but I just want to say too, I mean, some of my favorite moments with music are, where they provide a counterpoint as opposed to an emphasizing, or just a redundancy
kind of like
of
a
what you're seeing, right?
Yeah.
Juxtaposition and contrast is very interesting. And so there's a lot of room to play with that. I think one of the things that works so well with Herzog's films is that with the music that he chooses, is that he really is thinking outside of the box in terms of culturally, in terms of popular music versus things that are going to be new to most of an audience's ears. I mean, he talks about how his goal as a filmmaker is to bring new images to people, right? That it's as filmmakers, it's such an important role that we play to bring new images, to bring new landscapes, to bring new ideas to an audience. And I think it's challenging, or can be, because you've really got to kind of use a subversion and kind of really turn things upside down if you're using popular music. Let's say, like, for instance, the Rolling Stones and Scorsese. I mean, well, these are songs that have become so corporatized, so part of the fabric of like Western culture. Everybody knows these songs. Everybody knows every lyric. They've got this entire life of their own. Unless you're kind of subverting that and really going against people's expectations, which you certainly can do, if you're just playing into that music, it's like, I can't, there's not much room for me as an audience there. But if I'm listening to this music where I can't even, like, the lyrics are in another language, and it's like these kind of alien instruments and, unique compositions, and it's not just those like 3-chord progressions we hear in every single popular song in Western culture, but it's something that's like, whoa, I mean, it's like instead of a new landscape, it's a new soundscape. And I'm like, I have this huge room to move, to interpret. That's exciting to me. Like
Yeah, and
that's
I think that that's, again, it comes down to exactly basically what you're saying is, in when I, the point where I think that it comes across entirely kind of universally is that it comes down to the director's use of it, right? It comes down to
sure,
the choices of the, like,
of
for
course.
example, Paul Thomas Anderson has collaborated with Johnny Greenwood on
Yeah,
most of his movies,
and they're
and I think that,
fantastic. Yeah,
yeah,
they
they're
great
fantastic
work. Yeah,
soundtracks, and they're very upfront. They're very, in your face, when, especially, you think of There Will Be Blood, that opening scene where you have those Penderecki
but
style
it works.
strings, and
It
it's,
works so well, though.
it immediately makes you feel like the horror
Yeah.
of the wild, and that's what
Yes.
it is. Or in Phantom Thread, there's
Foreboding.
those great, those huge orchestral
Lush.
moments of like doom, but this kind of ironic romantic doom at the end, when,
Yeah.
of course, no spoilers, but if you've seen it, you get what I mean.
Right.
But I think that that's kind of where I think, and that's where I say that it should accentuate. So it shouldn't necessarily tell an audience exactly what to think, but I have no issue with a piece of music really being loud and brash and accentuating a moment, and
Sure.
coming out on front, and
I,
the noticeability, and so I agree in the terms of, yeah, like
well, I
telling an
think
audience what to
language.
think. And,
Yeah, language I
yeah.
would use. I guess I don't know. If this might be a way to explain it. I don't know if this resonates with you, but look, every aspect of your film should have an opinion,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's a difference between having an opinion
And
and
preaching.
and right, and just and kind of saying this is exactly what you should be thinking and feeling at this moment. And basically, I just imagine all of the worst Oscar-winning movies that have ever been made, and it seems to be so many of these are like the most manipulative. Like there'll be some biopic, that you like. This is exactly what you need to feel right now. Don't you see how
Yes.
like
Oh,
horribly
yeah.
treated this person was, and do you see how they overcame everything? And
Yeah,
and
there's that classic, like, almost like
uh,
an SNL trope of someone sad and you get that sad piano music and all that. Yeah, that I have no interest in. But
yeah,
again, there's moments where, like, I think that the visuals and the filmmaking can be so horrific. And I'm thinking right now specifically of the moment in for Schindler's List, for example,
hmm,
when the women's train car goes to the wrong place and it winds up at Auschwitz, and they're
oh
pushed
yeah,
into the chambers, and there's this, the music there on its own is very, very forward. It's very brash. It's very horrifying and
yeah,
haunting.
right,
But I think, again, it's one of those things where it's like, uh, in a moment like that, to me, it's not necessarily telling the audience what to feel. It's showing the audience how horrifying something like
right.
that can be, and that's where I think the difference is, and it's such a fine line to ride. But I think that that's exactly it. Is
Agreed.
it's allowing somebody, like, allowing me to, using the music to allow me to, in a fraction of the percentage of feeling the horror that those people would have felt in real
Right.
life, and bringing me to that. But I mean, I also, again, I know people who don't like music like that at all. Just
Sure.
on a very, very bottom line, it's like the music is, if you can hear it, it's bad. That it
Oh
should just
wow.
be there to complement slight moments, and that's it. Which I think is
I mean,
a huge waste of the entire medium of music.
well,
But
absolutely. I mean,
it's
that's
their choice.
I certainly don't hold that opinion,
Yeah.
and I mean, I guess I see it as like I guess language that I use to describe it is that music is it's just you've got this tapestry, right? A film
Hmm.
is this quilt work or this tapestry that where all of these different threads are coming together to create a whole. Music should be permeating that entire thing. I mean,
Hmm.
very different than Herzog, but one of my favorite examples of where soundtrack so absolutely positively permeates the entire film is this just creates extraordinary storytelling density and texture is Vangelis's soundtrack for Blade Runner.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah.
And it is so much more than just I mean it is that is such an integral part. I think that's one of the best examples of a soundtrack that is so integral to the film that if you were to remove or change that soundtrack, you would have a profoundly, radically different film.
Oh, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
You wouldn't even have the film. You would not even have Blade Runner. It would just not. I mean, it's
It's
it
such a
would
great example of just that, exactly. Like,
and
where
it's and so that's how I try to that's one of the milestones, I guess, or the like yardsticks I use of thinking, okay, if I had the perfect soundtrack. And I'm not saying sounds like that. I'm not saying same genre of music or style of music or something like that, but just in general sense of a music that is so woven into, so integral,
Yeah.
that it's you just couldn't remove it. That it's as much a part of that film as any other of the performances, of the cinematography, of the script.
Yeah.
Obviously that's a high that's a high place to get to.
Well, but I mean, it's a perfect example of exactly what I think you've put it into a really great kind of package with Blade Runner, because that's exactly what I mean. Is that
Yeah.
I think for some reason, a lot. I don't know if you know people like this as well, but for some reason, I just know a lot of directors, both amateur and people who are working professionally,
Yeah.
who always seem to separate music, who always seem to see it as like an add-on to a movie as opposed to
Sure.
an integral part of what you're making, and something that to be used. I'm curious to ask you too.
Yeah.
Have you ever, while making a movie, like still in production, still shooting,
Uh-huh.
worked with a composer at that point where they've been sending you? Because I've done this a few
I
times
have.
where I've had composers, send me music that they're
Yeah.
doing as the movie's being made, as opposed to just you finish the edit and send it to somebody.
I actually have, and there's been a couple of times where on some short films where I've been lucky enough. There was one instance where actually one of my leads was actually a musician, and like quite a talented musician.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of his contribution was not just his acting performance to the film, but he was actually helping to create some pieces of music for that film while we were in production. So he was actually, it kind of, he was in this like emotional space because of the role that he was playing, and kind of from the perspective of that character, which I thought was really cool. Now, of course, obviously, this is not something that can happen all the time, because your actors have to be inclined musically and then want to be able to contribute in this way. But this was a really cool situation. He's, here he is portraying this character. He's in this emotional space, and then from the POV of that character, he was creating music for the while we were in production. So that was a really unique
That's really neat,
opportunity.
yeah.
There was another situation where my brother, actually, who is a pretty talented guy, created some pieces of music for it, and I would work back and forth with him. I would show him rough cuts, or show him even just footage, like a few takes, and like kind of give him a sense of, here's where I'm kind of going. Let's talk about some music, and then he would actually present me some music, and I would have some music to actually edit to. So I have actually had some opportunities to do that, and I think that it was especially wonderful, that first example I gave you. That was a really cool, unique situation. But I do have experience with that. And then I also have experience of, I've got the entire piece. It is like done, it's edited, it's put together. I've got to go get music for it.
And send it. Yeah,
I've been there too.
I've had both as well. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not the actor, but I actually on the Hitchcock, when I just did during the summer. It was interesting. The person I knew was going to compose the movie was actually the boom operator for the thing, so we could at points kind of sit down and during
And
the
actually
shoot,
check,
sort of say like, and of course when you're doing something like Hitchcock, we both knew from the outset it was going to be a Herman sounding
right.
score.
You're coming from a specific place already, right?
Yeah, so we had a lot of fun with that, kind of playing around with like, okay, what if that bit in Psycho here where that could sound like that, and that was a lot of fun to do it like that. But I've also, like you, I've done it where I've been doing production and editing and sending rough cuts, and especially when a movie takes that long form short that I mentioned earlier that was about half an hour, took I think over the course of like 9 months to actually make and shoot, just because of course availability, and when you're doing something on no budget, that's just kind of what happens.
Yeah.
And so I would send rough cuts that were incomplete. There were tons of scenes missing, and sort of say, here's what I've got so far, here's and it was a really great way to watch that music kind of evolve.
Right, and it helps
then,
you evolve your edit, and absolutely.
And then of course at the same time, I've had points where the movie's been completely done and it's just sent off to somebody and
right. But even in that place, I mean, I feel like there's still a tremendous amount of collaboration that can be done. I mean, I don't think that but it's like we're in pre-production on a horror feature film right now, and part of what we're doing as producers is putting together with it's kind of going to be, I think, co-directed by myself and the writer of the original script. We've brought on another writer and a couple other producers, so there's a kind of core team of us that are in the process of putting together basically like the Bible for this film, or and so music is absolutely a part of that. I think it's easier to go immediately to images for many filmmakers because, again, it's kind of right. The reason you're in filmmaking is that you are really drawn to telling stories visually.
Yeah.
But inspirations and absolutely music can be a part of a style book or a Bible. And I think it's an excellent opportunity to just bring one more level or one more medium for a director to share their vision with all of the other department heads and all of the other collaborators. There's no reason you shouldn't do it. I think oftentimes what I've seen, this is kind of interesting. I've seen, because it just depends. Everybody thinks differently, but I've seen people point to, like, for example, I'm working with, let's say I'm working with a director and they're trying to explain to me kind of, well, here's like the feel that I want for this or that. And it's funny, I've seen people actually pick scenes or pick films and say, this is really, this is kind of, this really has the vibe that I'm kind of going for. And after I kind of, chip away at what they're really talking about, it's actually the music in the scene that's actually really doing it for them, as opposed to, anything that's being communicated visually. But it's kind of funny. I think just sometimes people don't even realize that what's inspiring them or what's kind of pushing them in this emotional place is actually the music of what's going on. So,
and I mean, I think it's really neat too, because God, my mind just went completely blank.
You don't even have the excuse of being filled up with pumpkin pie, man. I mean, come on.
I know. I've gotten filled up with chicken pot pie. God, let me try to get that thought back.
Hey, it's okay.
No, the horror movie, right? Yes,
yeah,
I got it. So it's actually interesting that you mentioned that the idea of the horror film kind of creating a lookbook, but not necessarily just a Bible, like you say.
Yeah.
On writing the beat sheet for the newest draft, because there were really significant changes made between the third and fourth drafts of this horror film that I'm directing.
Mm-hmm.
So I did, rather than just doing the fourth draft as a screenplay, I did a beat sheet first to confirm with the producers and the other creatives on it that this is where we want to go. This is the evolution of the story. This is kind of what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And in that beat sheet, I actually included musical cues, weirdly enough. And I said, I made a little note at the top and basically said, you don't have to listen to them, but these were the pieces that I was listening to as I wrote, and that kind of helped inspire the scene and might provide a little bit of a nice experience if you're reading it and, you want to click on the link, just do that and you can read it with it sort of like a audiobook with music almost.
Sure.
And so I did that, and it was funny because some of the people did and some of the people didn't. But the people that did were like, yeah, it really got me like in the mood of the scene, and it really helped me feel like kind of, because I think that also music is such a great communication device for really getting the point down on like what you want the scene to feel. Because I've had points where you can write a scene and you can be as specific as you want in terms of emotion and whatever. But people can still slightly misinterpret that. They might interpret it just a little bit differently, or might think like, oh, this scene is going to be played lighter than you intended. Absolutely. And I find that music can so often be really, really vital in just sort of being like, this is the core of the emotion that I want from this scene. And again, this is a process that is mine. I would never, anytime I'm teaching or whatever, I'm never saying to my students like, this is how you've got to write.
Sure, but it's another tool.
It works for me, and
it's another tool.
Try it out.
Absolutely, I mean, and there's no reason not to explore and experiment with these things.
Exactly.
And look, I mean, every, as a director especially, your goal is to communicate your vision to everyone you're working with as closely as possible to what you're seeing, and then of course then inspire. And why not use this valuable tool? There's no reason not to.
Yes.
And I've not done it myself, but certainly, I know actors a lot of times use music. I've done that. So as an actor, I've done this. I use music to prepare sometimes for scenes. as a character, you pick out music that has an emotional impact that that kind of brings you in line to the emotion of the scene that you're at. I mean, it can be a great tool. Definitely, directors often can use music to kind of on set. While they're shooting, there's so many different ways that you can utilize music.
Yeah.
And why not? Like, there's no reason not to use it. So not just during, you've got it pre-production, production, and of course in post, you've got the music that's actually going to be part of the film, what the audience is listening to. But you can certainly use music as a tool to communicate to reach emotional places in the story, while you're making the film. And like,
Exactly.
why not?
Yeah. No, it's I mean, again, it's another tool in the toolbox that there's no point in. And I just again want to reiterate too that like to anybody who's beginning that it's never black or white. Like,
of course, yeah, that's
you might just find that writing with music is a distraction and that
Right.
it boxes you into a corner or whatever.
Right.
And so you might choose not to do that. There's no. I think that's the really key point that I think we've both tried to make throughout all this is just that it's no. This is advice. This is not.
That's the beauty
gospel.
of filmmaking.
Yeah.
It's art. It's everybody's got their own process that's going to be slightly different than everybody else's. I mean, this is why we have unique filmmakers. Hopefully, your process is different. That hopefully your work is unique and it's a representation of your authentic voice, and that's what makes film and all other art wonderful. When it is wonderful, that it is truly an authentic expression of somebody's unique perspective. So. Absolutely. And it's, and as I sit here and talk about these things with you, and this is one of the things that I really love about doing these podcasts with you, Cullen, is that I get ideas. I'm like, oh, hey,
Oh, exactly.
Like with sound last time we were talking about sound, and I'm like, this is an area that I really could explore and experiment with a lot more. As we do this one here, I'm thinking, well, music is an area that I could really, I'm even thinking with the horror film that we're in pre-production with, okay, wow, like there are a lot of areas where I think that I've not utilized this tool as much as I could. And
Totally.
So I'm kind of excited about that. I kind of get inspired. I get ideas, but that's the wonderful thing is that, every time you sit down to work on a project, there you have just this huge arena of options. Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, but that's I feel like that's the fun of it is that it's like having all these paints in your paint box, and you don't have to use the same ones over and over again. You can use all these new different colors, and so it's exciting, I think.
And hopefully, you are without a doubt on every project going to learn so much more about your process and kind of what you can use. So that's
Absolutely.
what I like about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we've probably come to the end here of, unless you can think of anything that we might have missed that was covered in Herzog's lesson here about music, but I think we pretty much nailed it all.
Yeah.
So, well, once again, we're at the end of another episode. Cullen, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I've got a few notes that I'm going to go run and take real quick, things that I'm going to use on my on this horror project. I'm kind of excited about. Yeah, so that's definitely awesome. All right, well, until next time, when we will be covering Lesson 17, Editing. I hope everybody out there has a wonderful week, and we will see you soon.
Yeah. See you guys. Bye.